Hey everyone, thanks for watching my video. I'm Eddie Rodriguez and today I want to take a look at Tiny Epic Kingdoms. Take a look at that. Okay, so Tiny Epic Kingdoms is a 4X mini game. I can never seem to remember what 4X stands for. I think it's a explore, expand, exploit, and exterminate. So in this game, I think I did remember all of those. In this game, you're playing as your own kingdom, and your kingdom would be of a different fantasy race. So there's elves, there's orcs, there's dwarves, there's shapeshifters, there's merfolk, there's all kinds of different things. I think the game comes with like 16 different ones, but anyway, there's a ton of them. And what you're doing is you're going to be managing your kingdom. So you're going to be, developing your people. You're going to be gaining resources, and you may even go to war with the other players. So what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to teach you how to play this game. We're going to go in, take a look at the components. I'm going to go pretty in depth on how to play, and then I'll give you my final thoughts on it. All right, here we go. Okay, so here we have Tiny Epic Kingdom set up. Right now it's set up for a 2-player game, but you can go 2 to 5 players in this game. And I'm gonna go over what you're seeing here. So the first thing you see here in the middle, this is the actions that you can select during your turn. This is a tower card where you'll be able to build a tower for victory points. Again, this is a game about having the most victory points at the end of the game. These are the race cards, no pun intended, one for each player, and then you have your own kingdoms. Like I mentioned before, there are a whole number of different races that you can meet. There we have humans there, merfolk, undead. Give you a closer look there. There's some goblins, and that's just the back side of the card. And then on the other side here, if we take a look there, you can see the picture of your race there. These are magical abilities that you can research later, and then these numbers here are to track your resources. So you're going to be using resource tokens to track what you have of each resource. So at the beginning of the game, you're gonna either choose a race or randomly deal them out. With my group, we like to give out 2 or 3 to each player and then have them choose from there. And then you're gonna be given a kingdom card, and then you can select which side of the board you want to use. But once you make your selection, that's going to be your kingdom for the rest of the game. And they're all very different. They have different strategies for each one. And what's really cool is that each one is actually named, that has a name for each kingdom. So I thought that was a nice little touch there. So how does the game work? Well, on your turn, after you've selected your race and your kingdom, you're going to start off with 2 meeples on any one space. So here we started with 2 guys here, and we started with 2 guys over here. And then you will have 6 total resources of whatever combination you want, and the base game suggests 1 ore, 2 magic, and 3 food, and I'll get into what all of those do there. So what can you do on your turn? Well, the first thing you do on your turn is you must select an action. You're going to take one of these action tokens, and you're going to take one of the available actions. Now once you pick an action, that action will be unavailable for that round. So for instance, I could take this and take the first action here, which is patrol. When you take an action, you will perform that action and resolve it, and then each player in turn, in clockwise order, will have the opportunity to either copy that same action, or they can just sit back and collect resources. That's the only time you can collect resources. You cannot collect resources on your own turn. You can only collect resources on another player's turn. What are the different... Well, I'll get into the resources in a minute, but let's go over the actions. So you're going to select an action. The first action is patrol. When you take the patrol action, that lets you move a meeple from one space to an adjacent space as long as any part of it is touching. So I can move a guy from these fields to this forest, or move a guy from the fields to the mountains, or over here I can move this guy here. But it's important to note that it's on a single board, is the patrol. The next possible action you can take is the quest action. When you take the quest action, it lets you move a figure that's on a space that's bordering an edge to another kingdom that's bordering an edge. So for instance, I can take this guy who's on the mountains here. He's on the edge, and I can take the quest option to have him move over here to this force, because the force is also touching the edge. I couldn't move him to the center though, because that's sort of blocked off. What else? There's the build option. When you take the build option, that lets you spend ore, which is what this is, as a resource to build up your tower here. Each player is going to start the game with a little tower meeple next to this card. It won't be on the card yet. So the first time you play it, you'll spend 1 ore, and you can move, let's say it's the dwarves, or the elves rather. They can spend 1 ore and move their piece there to mark that they've built one level of their tower. This line here shows how many victory points that's worth at the end of the game. So the building the tower does nothing for you in the game. It's only worth victory points at the end of the game. So if I took that build option, I build the tower, and then the other player can either choose to build or collect resources. Another action that you can do is the research option. When you take research, that lets you spend your magic resources to upgrade your magic level. You start at 0, and that's what this funny little shape here, a lot of people think it's a boo or a bat, but it's actually a book token, and it's to just keep track of what level of research that you've developed. So the first time you do it, you will spend 1 magic, and you'll research the first level of magic. Now magic is pretty powerful in this game, because every time you reach a new level, you'll get a new ability, and when you upgrade to another level, you'll have that new ability plus any others that you had previously researched below it. Now on the tower and on the magic, you can only build 1 level at a time, and you cannot skip levels. So even if you had 5 total magic, I couldn't jump up to the 5th level. I'd have to build each one at a time. And you know, when you're selecting your race, if you take a good look at their abilities, that'll kind of give you a good idea of what strategy you probably should be employing with that race. So that's important to look at there. Another action you can take is the expand action. When you take that, that lets you add new meeples to the board. The way that works is you're going to select the expand action, and you're going to add the meeple to a space on the board. You can only add a meeple to a space on the board where you have an existing meeple, and no more than 2 meeples can ever be on a single space at a time. So for instance, in this space here, there's 2 guys here, so that I couldn't add anybody there, so I don't want to take the expand option. But let's say I had them separate like this, and then I select the expand option, then I can add the guy to one of these spaces here. You can, let's say I had a meeple on my opponent's board, I can expand there as long as there's not 2 meeples in the same space, so I could expand there. What else? And so that's the expand. Oh, actually, I forgot, you have to pay for that. After you add the meeple to the board, and it could be anywhere on any of the boards, you have to spend amount of food equal to the new total of meeples you have. So when you're adding your 3rd meeple, it's going to cost you 3 food. When you're adding your 4th, it will cost you 4 food, and so on. So it gets more expensive to expand and add more people on the board. And then the last action that you can take is the trade action. When you trade, that lets you trade any amount of one resource for equal amount of another resource. So that's just how that works simply. Now notice that I did not have enough action tokens to cover all the different actions that you can take. That's because if it's your turn to select an action and they're all been used up, you're going to clear the board and then select which action you want. So you pretty much usually be able to do what you want. Now let's say you don't want to take that action, you want to collect resources, because you really need resources to pay for stuff in this game. So instead of copying the action, you can sit back and collect resources. You're going to collect one of a resource depending on where your meeple is located. So for instance, if I have a guy here in the fields, that will give me 1 food. Now you always only collect 1 resource per space you're on, regardless of how many meeples you have on there. So I have 2 meeples here, that still only gives me 1 food. I don't get 2 food for having 2 guys there. So the only thing that having 2 meeples does in a space is to protect that space, because once there's 2 meeples, no more can be added there, meaning your opponent cannot explore or quest there or patrol there. So that kind of protects the space. But usually you want to move your guys on and spread them out. So Fields give you food. If you can see the forest, let me get a closer look at the forest. The forest has these little sparkly dots on it. That means they're magical. So if you have a meeple on the forest, when you collect resources, you will collect magic for that. In this particular case, I have a guy on fields and forests that will give me 1 food and 1 magic if I had that there. Mountains will get you ore if you have a meeple there. If you want to get multiples of a single resource, you'll have to occupy multiple regions. So in this case, having 2 forests there, I would collect 2 magic when I collect resources. Water spaces on the board like this and here are impassable. You cannot cross water space unless you have a special ability that says otherwise, and that includes rivers if I can find. So here's a good example. This space here has a sort of lake and river that goes around it. So these food spaces are actually not adjacent to each other because of the water. You cannot cross the water, so you'd have to kind of go around. Unless you're like the merfolk. The merfolk can go through water, they can swim. So there's usually exceptions to every rule in this game. Now you're gonna notice this kingdom here has a city in it. Now let me see if I can get a closer look for you that. So there's a city there. Now cities give you no resources for occupying it. The only thing that they do is that at the end of the game, if you have a meeple on it, it's worth 2 extra victory points, which is pretty big in this game. And you can share spaces with your opponent, which I'll get into in a moment. But on the city space, if you have 2 meeples there, then it's worth 1 victory point for each player there. There are also these crags. Like here, these gray crags, and these are impassable. You cannot put a meeple there, you cannot cross there. And then you have swamps, which swamps have ruins in them. And maybe you can see there's 3 different colored sparkles on that space. And that means when you move a meeple onto that space, you will turn that meeple face down. And this is the only time in the game where whether they're standing or not matters. When they're face down, that means they're exploring those ruins. So when you collect resources outside of your turn, at any point when you're collecting resources, that meeple can collect 1 of any resource that you want. Now you may not want to keep them like that the whole game, even though getting 1 of any resource is pretty powerful, because the number of meeples you have at the end of the game in play count towards your victory points, except if they're face down. So if this guy's face down, he counts for nothing. So how do you stand them up? If you take the patrol or quest option, that will let you stand up that meeple. But he won't move. Now once he's standing up, he cannot collect resources from that space, but he'll count towards victory points at the end of the game, and or you can move him around later. So what else can we talk about here? So that's basically the gist of it. Of most of the basic things. I didn't go into war, and as you see, you have dice here. Now you don't roll dice in this game. What the dice are used for is anytime you go to war. Let's say for instance this guy has a meeple there, and I use a patrol action or quest action to move into the same space. When you move into the same space as another player, it's considered an act of war. Now there is table talk in this game. You can discuss what you're planning on doing, because maybe you're not actually going to war with them. Maybe you want to make peace or whatever, and there's reasons for that. But here's how war goes. When you go to war, each player is going to take their 12-sided die that they have, and it's numbered 1 through 11, and then there's a little flag on there. What the player is going to be doing is the player is going to be selecting a number of resources they're willing to spend on that war. So if you look on the race card there, again no pun intended, and they're all the same. Magic is worth 2 resources towards war, ore is worth 1, and food is worth 0 there, if you can see that there. So you really can't use food for war unless there's a special ability for that. So what you're going to do is that once you go to war, each player in secret is going to select what they're willing to spend, and you can't spend more than what you have available, and the max you can spend is 11. Defenders win the ties. So what you're going to do is you're going to select what you want in secret, and once both players have selected, they're going to reveal what they selected. Whoever bid more will win the battle. Again, defenders win any ties. Now, as I showed you, that there is a little flag that you can select there. if you select the flag and the player selects any number, even a 1, that will beat the flag, which is actually peace in this game, or alliance. If both players select the peace option, this is why, you know, discussing what you're trying to do in diplomacy is important. If both players select that, then nobody loses, and the players will be able to coexist on that space. And what happens is there's no negative effects. It's really only good things. Now, whenever those players collect resources, they both can collect from that same resource. So that's kind of cool. And you can strike multiple alliances, you know, on different locations. But you have to go through the process each time that you move in. Now, let's say we have a setup like this where we're allied on 2 different places, and the gray decides to move in here and go to war. Let's say he decides to betray him, and he decides to spend number, I'm using the wrong die, number greater than, you know, let's say the other player say, oh yeah, we're still doing peace, I'm gonna do peace, and the other player says, no, I decide I'm gonna actually go to war this time. He selects a number. That means war is gonna break out in every single space where the players have allied units, and so that one bidding will count for all of them. So let's say he decided to betray him and spent a number of resources. He's going to win on all of those locations where they're sharing spaces. So you can sort of strike up a lot of alliances and then break it and really wreck your opponents. You have to be careful with the alliances because they can sort of leave you vulnerable. So how does this game end? Well, there's 3 end of game triggers. When a player builds the final level of their tower, that will trigger the end game. When a player develops the 5th level of their magic, that will trigger the end game. Or when a player has placed all 7 of their meeples anywhere within the game, that will trigger the end game. And the game will, at that point, will continue. That round will continue until all the action markers have been placed. Once the last action marker has been placed, then the game ends and you're gonna score points. What do you score points for? Well, like I pointed out here, your tower is worth a certain amount of victory points. That's usually the most victory points. It just doesn't do anything for you in the game. You're going to get victory points for the level of magic that you've achieved. And it's very simple. Whatever level of magic you have, that's how many victory points you get. So if you reach level 4, that's worth 4 victory points. Each meeple that you have in play that is standing up, it's worth a victory point. And if, like I mentioned before, if you have a city by yourself, then that's worth 2 victory points. And if you're sharing it, it's worth 1 victory point for each player. Okay, so what do I think about this game? Well, if it's not obvious from my enthusiasm, I love this game. I take this game everywhere. It's just so small that you can fit it in, you know, I can fit it in any backpack. Even, you know, most of the time when I go to game nights, I'm that guy that brings like a ton of games. So I have like the, you know, the suitcase of games. But so this always gets stuffed in there, but sometimes I don't have the big suitcase. I just have a backpack. Tiny Epic Kingdom's still there. I love this game because it's simple enough that I can teach it to new players, like players that are new to the hobby. I run a lot of game nights and stuff like that, so I'm often teaching people how to play games for the first time. This one's a real breeze to teach, as I just showed. So I love showing it, and you know, it's simple, but it has enough of the, you know, Euro style game aesthetics so that you know, I can introduce newer players to that without really pounding them over the head with it. So I really like a lot of things that the game did. You know, I like the art on it. It's just very, very nice. You know, a little bit whimsical, but yet serious at the same time. Hard to describe, but I really, really like it. The only negative that I could say about the game is that it seems like out of all the resources, magic is the most powerful resource, because with that, you know, it lets you upgrade your abilities, which gets you closer to the end game goal. And the abilities get very powerful for the different races, primarily for the elf race, which is the one that I'm a little bit dubious about, because once they get to a certain level of magic with their race, they can use magic as any resource, and ends up being that all they got to do is now collect magic. And that's been every game that I've played so far, the elves have won, where the elves were in. But that may be because in our games we don't go to war very often, and I think that if the players noticed that the elf player was building up his magic, they should probably attack him more. And we don't really go to war much. We found that war doesn't, it's tough to go to war in this game because you have to spend a lot of resources, and the resources are precious. You're not going to play a lot of rounds in this game. This is a 30-minute, it's a solid 30-minute game. I think the most I've gone over is 45 minutes, and that's only because we had players that were going really slow, had analysis paralysis. So you don't have a tremendous amount of turns in this game. Usually you're not going to go more than 5 or 6 rounds. So when you go to war, you're spending precious resources that's may take you a while to build up, especially when you get to later parts of the game when you got to collect 4 or 5 resources to get your last level of magic or to build that tower. It's going to be hard. So when you go to war at that point, that's really going to drain your resources, because if you're going to do the war action, if you're going to kind of do that and go to war, you kind of want to make sure that you win, and so you're going to be looking at the other player's resources, or how much he can spend. He can spend 7. All right, so I'm going to have to spend 8, and that's a big drain. That's one thing to be aware of. I, at least personally, have not gotten the hang of going to war in this game, and maybe somebody can show me. In fact, why don't you, if you're watching this video, in the comment section, why don't you tell me how, what are your strategies for going to war, or what are your strategies when you see another player winning, especially the elves. I've been having a problem with the elves. Now I get happy if I have the elves, because now I know my strategy is go straight magic. I'd like to hear from you what what are your strategies in the game, and just what your thoughts are on the game at all. But again, I really like this game. I highly recommend it. I think experienced players will get a lot out of this, and certainly newer players will experience something new, something that they haven't tried before. And I just really like it. So Tiny Epic Kingdoms, go check it out. And if you found this video helpful, please give it a like rating. If you want to stay up to date with my newer videos, I'm going to be doing a lot more reviews on games and a lot of other different geeky stuff. So then, subscribe to my channel, share with your friends if you like this game, if you want people to know more about it. Hopefully I did a good job explaining the game. If I didn't, let me know. But it'll help me out if you like, share, and subscribe, and it'll also be sharing it with your friends. So what's better than that? Again, thank you for watching, and you have a great day.